Cheers. Um, Okie dokie. So, one more time, we're reading Teaming with Microbes, The Organic Gardener's Guide to the Soil Food Web, Revised Edition, by Jeff Lowenfels and Wayne Lewis. Um, it's in the title as well. If someone asks, you can type exclamation point stream or exclamation point title in chat, and it should appear for others who would like to review it as well. If anyone asks, please help a stoner out, because I'm going to be reading for a little while for the sake of reading versus answering questions in the middle of the books. Chapters, sorry. Yes. Alright, I'm just making sure this shit's on. Yeah. Chapter 6. Algae and slime molds. Algae and slime molds are not related. We merely group them together because, while they have roles in soil food webs, they generally don't affect gardeners. That said, we hope we have already made the point that the soil food web is a community of organisms playing out a drama. When one or another character is removed, it may have significant consequences on how the play unfolds. Yep. Algae. Algae are broadly defined as single-celled or thread-like photosynthetic organisms, including seaweeds and even giant kelp. Who hasn't seen algae in a pond, river, or lake, at the beach, or, if not there, on the glass of a fish tank? There are three kinds of algae: marine, freshwater, and terrestrial. The latter often living in soil, on or near the surface, where sunlight is available, not near roots. While most algae require very moist conditions, it is surprising to find some that grow in hot deserts and at the frozen poles, though even these still require a film of water to survive. Although algae are closely related to bacteria on the tree of life, they are often thought of as they are often thought of as primitive plants because they are photoautotrophic, meaning they take energy from the sun and produce their own food. Indeed, algae, like plants, are primary producers, not dependent on the soil's organic matter or other members of the soil food web for their food needs, as are bacteria and fungi. Moreover, algae lack the specialization that characterizes higher plants, and, unlike plants, they have no true roots, leaves, or stems, and don't have a vascular system, water and food conducting system. The cell walls of all but the the cell walls of all but the diatoms, a form of algae, do contain cellulose, and in this way they are like plants. The cell walls of diatoms are composed of silica covered with an organic skin that decays and disappears after the organism dies, leaving behind, in huge number, the silica skeletons that make up diatomaceous earth, a product familiar to many gardeners. Ooh. Most gardeners associate algae with bodies of water, not the raised bed or lawn. Yet, there you will find them if there is enough moisture. Terrestrial algae require not only light, but a film of water in order to survive. A teaspoon of soil may contain anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 cells of green algae, phylum Chlorophyta, yellow-green algae, Xanthophyta, and diatoms, Bacillariophyta. Bacillariophyta. Yeah. At one time, algae served as pioneer organisms, growing on moist rock surfaces and, when they died, combining with weathered rock and air and water to form early soils. In this important way, algae helped start the succession of life by providing necessary organic matter when there was no other. Yeah. Diatoms. 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 Not diatoms. Alright, sorry. Yeah, diatoms. Bacillar. Sorry, I tried to say it too. Bacillaria phyta. Yeah, sorry. Okay, one more time I'm going to read that. At one time, algae served as pioneer organisms, growing on moist rock surfaces and, when they died, combining with weathered rock and air and water to form early soils. In this important way, algae helped start the succession of life by providing necessary organic matter when there was no other. Algae help to create soil by forming carbonic acids as part of their metabolic functions. This causes rocks to weather, a great example of chemical weathering brought about by biological activity. Resultant bits of mineral and the dead algae combine, producing soil eventually. This is not unlike the decay of rock surfaces caused by lichens, the symbiotic relationship between certain algae and fungi. The fungus provides a humid and somewhat protective environment in which the alga can live and in return receives photosynthesized food from the alga. That was the lichen, the symbiotic relationship between alga and fungi. In this relationship, the decay abilities of algae are aided by their fungal partners, and the process of weathering is sped up considerably. Lichens contribute nitrogen to the soil, and blue-green algae, cyanophyta, use the enzyme, nitrogenase to fix nitrogen, either in a symbiotic relationship or non-symbiotically, similar to nitrogen-fixing bacteria. This is how rice plants can get nitrogen from the water in which they grow. In truth, the role of algae in gardening is minor because of their need for sunlight, which can only penetrate a short distance into the soil. However, where they do exist in the soil, algae can excrete polysaccharides, mucilage, and slimes, all sticky stuff, which help bind and aggregate soil particles. Let me reread that, sorry. However, where they do exist in the soil, algae can excrete polysaccharides, mucilage, and slimes, all sticky stuff, which help bind and aggregate soil particles. Their presence can also help to form air passageways in other compacted soil, and algae fit into some soil food webs as primary producers that are eaten by certain nematodes. Slime molds. The slime molds are unusual looking, amoeba-like organisms that inhabit damp, rotting wood, leaves, manure, lawn thatch, rotting mushrooms, and other organic material. They spend most of their lives pursuing bacteria and yeast in the soil. A few hundred different kinds of slime molds are in many ways like fungi, but largely differentiated by the way they eat. Whereas fungi digest their food externally and then bring the nutrients inside the organism, slime molds engulf food and digest it internally. The two groups of slime molds, Dictyosteliomycota. Yep. Cellular slime molds and Myxomycota, plasmodial slime molds.
Process complete.
Oh, jeez. Oh, gave me a heart attack there. Thank you for the $1. Oh my gosh. So, cellular slime molds and plasmodial slime molds have similar life cycles. They start out as spores and germinate into mixamoeba, um, amoeboid organisms that live in the soil and ingest bacteria, fungi spores, and small protozoa, locking up the nutrients they contain and preventing them from leaching out. They themselves are food for insect larvae, worms, and in particular, specialized beetles that have mandibles designed to scoop up the soft mold and cram it into their mouths. Oh gosh. At some point, for no apparent reason, individual mixamoeba swarm together. Up to 125,000 or so form a mass that looks something like a big slug, a dollop of jelly, or in some cases, vomit. These masses are of various sizes, in shades of tan, yellow, pink, or red, and are actually quite attractive in their own way. The species of one common plasmodial slime mold genus, Phacerum, are usually about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeter thick, and can grow to 1 foot, 30 centimeters or more wide. The individual cells in the mass lose their walls, and the resulting plasmodium, or multinucleated mass of cytoplasm, emerges from the soil and slowly moves over leaves, grass, driveways, logs, mulch, and anything else in its way. It does so at an average speed of 1 millimeter per hour, engulfing food as it goes. If a source of organic dead matter is put near a plasmodium, it will go to it. Even more amazingly, if you cut a plasmodium in half or even in quarters, the parts will come together again. All sorts of theories have been put forward to explain why these organisms swarm. It may be that when food becomes scarce, there is a need to work together. There is, after all, something to be said for strength in numbers. What is known is that each individual mixamoeba leaves a bit of chemical attractant in its wake as it travels, presumably on a path towards nutrients. Other slime molds come in contact with the slime sheet, not unlikely that left by a slug as it travels, and take the same trail, adding their exudates to the path. As more and more organisms gather on the path, each adding its chemical slime to the mix, the attraction increases until literal swarms of mixamoeba congregate in a growing mass. Eventually, the plasmodium finds an appropriate spot and forms a fruiting structure, a sporangium. This unusual looking, is it sporangium or sporangium? Sporangium. I don't know. This unusual looking body is of a distinctive shape for each slime mold species. Some sporangia are like tiny raised towers, in the top of which spores are formed. Sporangia come in yellow, blue, red, brown, and white, and form a beautiful net of colors that really is as pretty as anything you can grow in your gardens. From the soil food web perspective, slime molds help cycle nutrients, and the slime each individual mixamoeba creates helps bind soil particles. When conditions become unfavorable, plasmodia dries up and turn into powdery dust. Although these organisms don't play a major role in the garden, when a gardener comes across a slime mold, he or she remembers it. Yeah. This is true. I have pictures of slime mold I found in Maine. We went mushroom hunting and found all sorts of different mushrooms and fungi. It was pretty cool. I was putting a gallery together and I was like, look at all of these. And someone's like, that's not fungi, that's a mold. Or a slime mold. And I was like, what? I didn't even know what that was until what I just read, you know? Chapter 7, Protozoa. Most gardeners first poked and prodded protozoa as part of a biology lab assignment, which invariably involved identifying and sketching cell parts of a paramecium. They may therefore remember that protozoa are single-celled organisms with a nucleus, which makes them eukaryotic, and therefore, along with fungi, members of the domain Eukarya. Protozoa, which term we use descriptively in this book, as shorthand for a group of non-algal, non-fungal, animal-like unicellular organisms across several kingdoms. But don't get us started, are almost always heterotrophs, meaning they cannot make their own food. Instead, they obtain their nutrients by ingesting bacteria, primarily, but also the occasional fungus, and, to a lesser extent, other protozoa. Paramecia are still the favorite microbe. That's because these, and other soil protozoa, are considerably larger than bacteria. 5 to 500 micrometers versus 1 to 4 micrometers. This may still seem small to you, but in the scheme of microorganisms, 500 micrometers is pretty large. So large that under ideal lighting, conditions of paramecium, at least in water, is visible to the human eye. You still have to look very carefully, and certainly will not be able to differentiate any of those internal or external features you were told to label in school. But without a microscope, you can see them flitting around. Through an electron microscope, unseen detail is observable. Protozoa are something to Protozoa are something to stay away from if you are as small as a bacterium. By way of comparison, if a single bacterium was the size of a pea, a paramecium would be as long as a watermelon. This is why bacteria can hide most protozoa in soil spores that are too small for the protozoa to reach into. Another way to make the comparison is to go back to that same teaspoon of good soil with its billion-count bacteria and only several thousand protozoa. Over 60,000 kinds of protozoa are known, and contrary to any residual youthful hope you may have had that they only live in pond water, a majority of them live in the soil. However, all do require moisture to lead an active life. Given the crucial role protozoa play, a quick review of some biology and then some is in order. Yeah. Look, they got this really nice picture of the paramecium in the book, too. Behold. Yep, that's it. I don't even really have to zoom in that hard. Yep, there it is. Oh, my favorites. Amoeba, ciliates, and flagellates. Protozoa come in 3 basic models. First are the pseudopods, single-celled animals with amorphous forms most will remember as amoeba. These are constantly on the move, a feat, if you will pardon the poor pun, accomplished by pouring their cytoplasm, the soup with all its life parts, into one or more false appendages called pseudopodia, false feet, pseudopodia, false feet. Pseudopods themselves are of 2 types. The first has a shell-like exoskeleton and 5 predefined holes. Think of a bowling or golf glove, through which the pseudopodia can appear. The other class lacks any shell or predefined pseudopodia. These amoeba are relatively large microorganisms, and many would be as visible as paramecia if they weren't so transparent. Amoeba lack a mouth and ingest bacteria by surrounding them and engulfing them in gas bubbles. Ooh! Into which are transmitted digestive enzymes. The entire vesicle is then absorbed and waste products subsequently expelled. Yeah. Was that TOS? Yep. Next in size are the ciliates. These protozoa are considerably smaller than their amoeboid cousins, but still much larger than their bacterial prey. Ciliates are covered with rows of hairs that beat like the slaves' oars on a Roman galley, propelling the organism to food or away from enemies. In addition, these oars create currents that bring bacteria into the ciliate's mouth region so they can be ingested. The familiar paramecium is a ciliate protozoan. The third and smallest of protozoa are flagellates. Their one or two long whip-like hair, or flagella, allow them to move about in search of food. A few flagellates, like Euglena, the classic freshwater flagellates of pond water, produce their own food via photosynthesis and are thus autotrophs. Most, however, are heterotrophic, obtaining nutrients from eating and digesting other organisms in the soil. More symbiotic relationships. As so many of the soil food web organisms do, protozoa form symbiotic relationships, particularly with bacteria, to such an extent that such associations appear to be the norm rather than the exception. A classic example is that of the flagellates residing in the guts of termites, which digest the wood fibers the termites eat. We now know that the relationship is actually a three-way one. Electron microscopy reveals working microbes in the gut of the termite as well. These fix nitrogen from the atmosphere for the flagellates. Not often do you find a triple symbiotic relationship, though surely more will be discovered as exploration courtesy of the electron microscope continues. Lots of ciliates, too, enter into symbiotic relationships with bacteria. Some ciliates live in sand and farm bacteria colonies, and it is the methane generating archaea inside ciliates that are responsible, in part, for the methane gas that develops in some ciliates as anaerobic respiration takes place. Protozoa are attracted to and enter into an area where there is a good supply of bacteria in a pretty consistent progression. On average, a protozoan can eat 10,000 bacteria a day. First come the flagellates, the smallest of these microbes. These can move into small spaces in the soil, places where the large protozoa cannot and where bacteria are plentiful. Even after the larger ciliates arrive on the scene, the still large population of bacteria provides plenty of sustenance for both the original flagellates and the newer ciliates. Finally, amoeba move through in search of bacterial prey, and also smaller protozoa. The combined pressure on the bacterial population becomes so great, numbers start to diminish. As readily available bacteria becomes harder to find, the larger ciliates and amoeba start to eat more of the smaller ciliates and flagellates. This reduces the population of ciliates and flagellates, which in turn allows the populations of bacteria to stabilize and return to a level that maintains the soil food web balance. Why aren't all the bacteria consumed by protozoa? One reason is that protozoa are restricted by bacterial slime. This film is hard for them to penetrate, and it lacks the oxygen that they require. Another reason is that the bacteria are smaller and able to hide in tiny soil spores. It seems counterintuitive that increasing protozoa populations most often results in increases in the bacterial populations upon which they prey. This occurs because fewer bacteria means less competition for nutrients among the surviving bacteria. Not having to compete all the time for food means they can divide well-fed. Likewise, their progeny will have something to eat so they can multiply as well. If protozoa can keep their own numbers in check, They have all the bacteria and fungi they need to eat. It is not just populations of bacteria that protozoa keep in balance. In their search for sustenance, some protozoa attack nematodes. Others reduce nematode population by competing for the same limited food resources, i.e., other protozoa and fungi. This also helps keep bad guy nematode populations from flourishing. Protozoa need moisture to live, travel, and reproduce, and hydroscopic water. That thin film of water left on surfaces of soil particles and aggregates provides it under normal soil conditions. If things dry up, however, most protozoa stop feeding and dividing and go dormant, encasing themselves in a cyst. How long protozoa can survive in this state varies from species to species. Some can withstand an extended dry spell for several years. This technique ensures the survival of both the protozoa and the plants that benefit from the nitrogen and other nutrients released by their activity. Mineralizers. Of critical importance to the workings of the soil food web are the waste products produced when protozoa ingest bacteria or fungi. These wastes contain carbon and other nutritional compounds that had been immobilized but are now once again mineralized and made available to plants. Nitrogen compounds, including ammonium, are among them. If nitrogen-fixing bacteria are present, remember these usually require a pH of 7 or above to have good populations, free ammonium is converted into nitrates. If not, the nitrogen remains in ammonium form. Mineralization of nutrients is crucial to the survival of plants in a natural system. Our premise is that by interfering with or destroying the soil food web, the gardener has to step in and do extra work, making gardening a chore instead of an enjoyable hobby. If you are not convinced, then consider that as much as 80% of the nitrogen a plant needs comes from the waste produced by bacteria and fungi eating protozoa. Since bacteria and fungi are attracted by plant exudates to the rhizosphere, and that is where protozoa consume them, a huge source of plant food is delivered right around the roots. Oh yeah. Other soil food web functions. All protozoa participate to some degree in the decay process by inadvertently ingesting small particles of organic matter. These are then broken up into smaller pieces, if not totally digested, and become available to bacteria and fungi in the waste stream. And other soil food web members rely on protozoa as one of their food sources. Another reminder that is a soil food web, not chain, with which we are dealing. Certain nematodes, for example, are dependent on the protozoa as their food source and have developed specialized mouthparts to better ingest them. Worms too rely on healthy populations of protozoa. Without protozoa in the area, gardens are devoid of worms. Similarly, many microarthropods require a healthy dose of protozoa to thrive. Finally, not all protozoa are beneficial. Several kinds eat roots, but in a healthy food web, these are kept in check by other cannibalistic protozoa. So, to a certain degree, protozoa serve as a food source for themselves and remain, even the worst of them, crucial characters in a healthy soil food web. Oh yeah.